Good afternoon, everyone. This is Teresa Moulton, and I'm the Editor-in-Chief of the Change Management Review. Welcome to the Change Management Review and ACMP New England's co-sponsored webinar, Defining Internal Change Management Consulting Organizations, a Practitioner Discussion Panel. We're really happy to have you here, and without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. So we've got a couple of objectives for today. Basically, we want to have our experts help us to understand the nature of internal change management groups and how they operate. And we really want to have a discussion with everybody on the call about some of the lessons learned about how they launch the group and what they go through on a day-to-day basis. And then, you know, as I mentioned before, we definitely want to leave time for some Q&A. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. We have Melanie Francis from Akamai, and Melanie is also the Vice President of the ACMP New England chapter of ACMP Global. We have Bill Murphy of Travelers Insurance, and Bill is the President of the ACMP New England chapter. And then we have Eris Scarla from the Federal Aviation Administration, and all three of them are currently operating internal change management consulting groups, and in some cases some of them have actually operated them and built them in their previous organizations as well. And as I mentioned, my name is Teresa Moulton, and I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Change Management Review. So we're going to go ahead and get started with the presentations. The first person that we're going to hear from is Melanie Francis from Akamai. So Melanie, welcome.
Thank you so much, Teresa. I'm delighted to be here. I am from Akamai Technologies, and I don't want to assume that all of you know what that is. Akamai is in the high-tech space. We are an internet services company. We sell our services primarily to businesses, organizations, governments, and media firms. And our objective at Akamai is to make the internet fast, reliable, and secure. So as you are receiving apps, software uploads, music, social media, it's Akamai working in the background to make that happen. Our change management story begins about 3 years ago when we were just getting started. So the organization that I'm going to tell you about from a change perspective is about 2.5 to 3 years old, and I was able to come in and build that from scratch. It started with a large project, and then after we had a successful deployment on a large project, we set out and had an HR initiative called Leading Change. So it was one of the strategic initiatives within HR. It's still going on and will continue to go on as we mature our change management capabilities. We're essentially doing two things. The first is a big mindset shift in the organization with respect to the way that we approach our projects. Instead of our projects focusing on go-live dates and installation, we need to change the conversation and ask about business outcomes, because obviously that's where the value for change management actually comes to bear. So having that mindset shift and changing the nature and the direction and the conversation about our projects is the first thing. We also want to make sure that from a strategic planning and budgeting point of view, that change management resources are budgeted as you would budget any other type of resource, like a systems integrator, a systems analyst, a project manager, because the change team that I have here at Akamai is quite small. It is myself and 2 other folks today. We are a 6,000-person organization, but we run across many, many projects because of a 3-tier service model that I'm going to introduce you to in a second. So what that means is that if we have more demand for our projects than we have supply, we have to make sure that the project teams are setting aside budget so that I can work with them to bring in the resources that we need, and we will all follow the same framework. And so clearly we need leadership help in that regard as well. We're also building skills. We're building another muscle. So we are tracking our change maturity, and we are broadening the reach. We're putting change management in the hands of many, because even though I said that I have a 3-person change management team, we have a community of practice with over 130 people in it already. And so that's really what I consider our change management organization, 130 people who are performing change in some way, shape, or form at Akamai. This is a 3-tier service model, and as we all know, each project is unique. So while we apply a similar framework or the exact same framework, most of our projects fall under the do-it-yourself category. So that's when the 130 people who have gone through our 2-day change management training, custom change management training class, will use the tools that we provide to them with an online toolkit, and they will go and apply change management techniques on their projects. That's for small, low-risk projects. We have also trained every single HR business partner in our organization, and so for higher risk projects that don't require a whole lot of their time, usually maxing out at 20% of their time, we have a number of projects that are led where the HR business partner is wearing the change management hat. And then for those projects that are highly cross-functional, very large, go on for many years, high risk, that's where we're going to bring in the dedicated change management professionals who report to me and sit on my team. And so that's how we cover the breadth of the change projects that are happening within the organization. And I have a triage model that I work with projects so that we can work together to determine the nature of their project and what treatment we want to provide across the 3 tiers that will be the best fit for their project from a resourcing standpoint. The final slide for me here tells you a little bit about the journey that we've gone through thus far at Akamai, where in 2013, as I said before, we were a billion-dollar company, and we had this very large Oracle reimplementation project that absolutely needed change management service. So that's where we started, and that's how I came into Akamai. From there, we did our first change plan, we deployed the Oracle solution, and that's when the HR initiative began. So we kicked that off. We kicked off our pilot training in 2015. We piloted our toolkit in 2015. It caught on like wildfire, and we have now taken that into the pace and the rate and pace that we have today, where we've had hundreds of people go through the training. The tools are in full production. We have that as our own special community of practice website. We run a quarterly community practice meeting where we get all of the people who are practicing change back into a meeting room and discuss best practices and share with one another. And then we track our maturity on an annual basis. We do it every June, and I'm happy to say that when we started, we did it the first time, we were at a 1.5 out of 5, and now we're at a 2.6 and looking to hopefully be at a maturity level 3 when we do it again next year. So that is the summary of the Akamai story, and I'd be very happy to address anything in more depth when we get to the Q&A at the end. So with that, Terry, let me go ahead and turn that back to you.
Thanks, Melanie. Sounds like you've had quite the experience there on the path to building change management capability, and we're looking forward to the Q&A. So now we're going to move on and introduce you to Bill Murphy of Travelers, and welcome, Bill.
Thank you, Terry, and thank you all for being logged in and dialed in for us today. So while all 3 of our companies are quite different, I think you probably will hear some common themes as we describe some of the background of where we are and how we got there. So for me, I wanted to use this slide, which tracks the journey to change management maturity, and talk about it in terms of blocks of time. This process at Travelers was actually begun based on a business need a bit before I joined the organization. To keep it brief, our business insurance, property casualty, liability, and different risk management solutions was largely a holding company with some 18 business units in it, which meant our systems didn't talk to each other, and we weren't extremely easy to do business with. So leadership decided there was a need to move from that sort of holding company model into an operating model. And that drove a lot of investment and focus on foundational systems, which kicked up the need for let's also focus on the people that need to change to use these systems and make sure they're ready, willing, and able. So 2010 through 2012 was really what I would call laying the foundation for our change management practice. There was, validation of needs, a very detailed assessment of readiness or lack thereof across the organization, selection of a particular change management approach and a vendor that backed that, and then standing up the practice, similar to what Melanie mentioned, a very lean model, a highly leveraged is what was described to me when I was recruited. So that was all in place when I came on board in 2013. The incumbent had moved on to another position. And so I came in and, was asked to, let's take this now to the next level. And I would describe the years 2013 through 15 as building capacity. We came upon a entry point of an intensive multi-day workshop where teams that had a major change initiative going on or shortly upcoming would come with teammates, and we would expose them to the approach and how to use it, but it was all applying it towards real work from the very beginning. And that really helped us get traction here at Travelers because we are a very execution-oriented organization. And that helped to build a community of practice, similar to what Melanie mentioned. For us, we've now been rolling that workshop for 3+ years. So we've actually put over 1,000 team members through that effort with some 400 projects. And from that, we also built another cadre of people in our COP that are, even stronger skill-wise and have the interest to provide deeper consulting and coaching support. So we availed of an extra 4 days of intensive training that gets someone accredited, as we call it. I like to call them our super users, and they can not only use the approach on their projects, but can also help others on other projects in other areas of the company. And finally, that's probably about 80 people right now. And a subset of that group went on to also become certified to train other Travelers groups in the multi-day workshop. So that was a big focus for 2013 through 15. Currently, and I'm anticipating it at least taking a couple of more years, is really where the magic happens, as I tell sponsors. The impact on the business. While we have seen qualitative responses and information, the conditions until recently weren't really right to try to track that in terms of how is change management helping us successfully implement business projects and get the people to not only adopt to the new way of changes, but to stick with it. So I'm very excited that 2017 will be a year where my change management function will support an overall BI organizational transformation. And part of that process is looking at how do we realize the benefits from these projects. And I'll walk hand in hand with my business partners to figure out, once they establish the metrics they want to track, where are the ones where having a concentrated change management effort has made a positive difference. Okay, and so this one I would characterize as a sort of engagement model. It's a slide I'll use very often when I'm having an initial meeting with executives, either because they have a large group that's getting ready to avail of our approach, or I'm trying to position them to become sponsors or stronger sponsors. And just to hit some of the highlights as I walk you around the clock face, leadership at 12 o'clock there, leadership team overview and application. So this is a chance to get some time with a leader and their direct reports to talk through the approach, the rationale for it. Very often there are results within their organization, and I can bring in people that have driven an initiative using our change management approach to be sort of a use case, if you will. So that's a key entry point. The workshops I already mentioned as we move around the clock face. Stakeholder readiness can be, usually there's already been some work in this space, but what we can do is help them not only validate what they have, but perhaps uncover some other areas they hadn't thought of, and to me, most important, prioritize. Because as most of us know, we don't have the resources and the time to be high touch with all the target groups or impacted groups. So let's focus on the ones that will make the most difference. Down to 5 o'clock, change agent selection and preparation. Sometimes this is a done deal, but for the larger projects where perhaps the sponsors are in place and some initial key change agents are in place, we have a wherewithal for them to talk about what are the overall skills we need this team to have, where are we already strong, and do we have some key gaps that could inform who we would select to fill out the team. Down through 6 o'clock, sponsor alignment. In my travels, this can be a make it or break it situation. If you have a few key sponsors that, let's say, at least 3/4 of the objectives align across them, my experience is you're positioned for success depending on how you do everything else. If you have less than that, it's a real risk factor for getting it done no matter how flawless you are with everything else. So that's a piece there. Stakeholder readiness, of course, is what many of us think about as a key part of change management. So where is readiness high and how do we leverage that? Where do we anticipate resistance? How can we uncover it, prioritize that, and then zero in and try to manage those higher priority risk areas? Reinforcement is a piece that, frankly, I hadn't focused on as much until I came here and adopted the approach we're using here. So this is getting leadership up front to think about the key rewards and recognition we want to provide to the people that adopt and stay with it and help others. But by the same token, we also want to have a few well-chosen consequences. These are not things that are done in public, certainly, but news does travel. If there are a few people that are really going out of their way to resist, perhaps even sabotage the change, if their leaders are getting with them one-on-one and making it clear that's not acceptable, that word gets around just like the public rewards and recognition. Okay, and then finally, integrating. One of the things our practitioners really enjoy hearing when we orient them to our approach is we're not expecting them to maintain some sort of change management methodology off to the side. It's more a case of weaving in those things that make the most sense into their existing or upcoming planning process. Okay, and then the one point in the middle there is the coaching and consulting. It's great to expose people to this approach and material, but there's always a need for follow-up discussions, validating that they're heading in the right direction. So we try to be very responsive on that front as well. Okay, so that's my walk around the engagement model. And Terry, let me turn it back to you.
Thanks, Bill. We're going to go ahead and turn it over to Eris Scarla of the FAA.
Thank you, Terry. I want to thank you for having me here today, and thank you, everyone, for participating. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we're doing in the Federal Aviation Administration, and like what Melanie and Bill talked about, so we have very similar objectives in what we do and how we're doing it. But changing how government works is extremely important to us. Federal Aviation Administration is responsible for managing the world's safest aerospace system. And it's a mission that we take very highly. It's the key thing that we want to make sure that happens. Every time anyone gets on a plane, we want to make sure it's the safest it can be. FAA currently has over 45,000 employees dedicated to that safety mission. In our division alone, we have a little over 5,400 employees currently working doing that. About 4 years ago, it was seen that, and as you can imagine, with all the change that's going on, the regulations, and a lot of you know about the new drones that are coming into this system and everything, change is constant in our organization. So it was seen about 4 years ago we really needed to do something, so we brought in change management and was given that responsibility to start looking at that. So as you can see on the slide, the mission that we want to do, our mission that we are doing for change management is we want to build a foundational change management program to support the people of the FAA in developing a sustained and sustaining a change-ready organization. That's our key mission in the change management group, is to lay that foundation for the generations to come so that change management is seen as a constant behavior. The vision that I have for it and my ambition is to drive that successful enterprise-wide change management program into the very fabric of the FAA. All of my team and everyone knows me at FAA is the way I like to talk about this is a slow intravenous drip into that culture. Make it stick. And one of the things that our administrator has, one of his key initiatives that he wants to make sure that happens, is that we foster transformational leaders, getting away from just project-oriented or unilateral control type leadership, really building transformational leaders who demonstrate the competency and ability to lead the organization to change efforts as we go through it. All right, so how are we doing this? So like Melanie showed you with her three-tier system, Melanie has been very much a colleague and part of my community of practice in helping. We have that same three-tier system. We do it a little bit differently, but one of the things like Bill showed you in his slide about the coaching, what we also realized in our leadership development is to do good change management isn't just doing change management alone. We had to look at the behaviors of our leaders, and we wanted to change, we focus on changing their mindset, give them a new skill set around how to use change management, and then give them the tool sets they need to actually put it into practical application. So we have what we call the leadership development team that is part of our infrastructure in the flight standard service of the 5,000 people. Our group has 3 dedicated units, groups working on that. We have a coaching unit that actually uses what we call mutual learning and the coach approach to work with leaders so that they can develop better skills at delivering change management, but also helping develop themselves. We also have a mentoring group that has professional mentors from our organization that work with the junior, what we call frontline managers and middle managers, in helping prepare them to lead change. And then we have the change management group that I'm responsible for, and we have full-time dedicated change management advisors that work on the methodology and embedding change management throughout our organization. So the critical path that we're taking for building and sustaining our change capability and maturity is the things that we have noticed from the community with the ACMP, others, and ourselves, is those 2 bullet points are really important for us. Is we found to change, we needed the dedicated change management resources. Doing this project to project wasn't going to be enough to sustain that different change in the mindset. So we have a very active and participatory, I'll call him the primary sponsor, our senior director, has made the commitment and realizes that his mindset had to change. Now he wants that skill set and tool set so that he can take it throughout the organization. The other thing that we've been fortunate enough is we were able to show the necessity for establishing a change management group. Having the dedicated resources is one thing, but actually having us separated out and not just part of someone else's program has been a vital part for us to move forward. Those 9 steps are not unique. All of you that are in change management probably see a lot of similarity in there. But that's how we're building our change management program in the FAA. We're taking them step by step, not necessarily in any certain order, but those are all part of the project, the program management plan for developing our change management group. Our change management group's been around for 4 years. Like I said, we took it from concept to design and now strategy, but we have implemented major pieces of this already because we wanted to be able not only to adapt from the private and public sectors, but we had to also adapt it and adopt. It's a mix, because when you deal in the government, it doesn't work the same in the corporate world. So this is our strategy for building and sustaining the change management group.
Thanks, Eris. As the three of you were speaking, we did get some general questions that I thought we might address and then head into the structured questions uh, as we move forward here. So, Melanie, we have some questions about Akamai, and actually two came in on the same topic, and those were about how do you track your maturity, and can the tools or metrics for measuring the maturity of the change management methodology be described in a little more detail?
Sure. That's a great question. Thank you. So firstly, let me talk about the governance that surrounds the act of tracking maturity. I have put together what I call a change management advisory board. That board consists of about 8 to 10 people, HR business partners, the head of the PMO and the CIO organization, a finance representative, a representative from our order-to-cash operations. And the idea of that board is one, to advise on where we should be spending our time in terms of maturing our change practice, but also the intent of that board is to be 1 degree of separation between myself and any major change that's happening at Akamai. So we meet on a monthly basis and go through our portfolio and also talk about the activities that we need to put in place to continue to build the maturity. So it is with that board that I sit with them once a year, and we use the ProSci Change Management Maturity Tracker. So you can look for that on ProSci. It's an instrument that is very well designed, and it asks you questions in about 7 categories. I'm not sure the exact number, but so then we work together as a team, and we go question by question, and we come to an alignment on what the answer of each question is, and then that diagnostic prints out a report and tells you what your number is overall. And then you can go back to the ProSci Best Practices report and see how your company's stack ranks against other companies of a similar revenue profile. So not only do we know what our number is, we know that Akamai is, because we're 1.5, almost a $2 billion, we're a $2 billion company at this point, that the majority of companies of our size are either at level 2 or at level 3. So we know that we have room to grow, and that's why we have our aspirations at level 3 right now. And we know, and the diagnostic tool tells us this as well, that we know what we have to do in order to get to a level 3. We have to have more projects that are using change management. We have to have more people well-versed in it. One of the things that we're going to be doing next year as a result of taking this maturity assessment is that we're going to be adding in a change management competency for our VPs and for our senior directors. Again, trying to raise their game and build awareness around it. And so the diagnostic tool helps you understand where are your shortcomings and what do you need to do in order to move it forward.
Great. Thank you for that. And here's a general question, I think, for all three of our guests. And this is, what vendors have you worked with? And Melanie, I know you just spoke about ProSci, but Bill and Eris, are there other vendors that you've used to help with your tools and methodologies and approach?
So this is Bill. Yes, I've been able to work with a number of different vendors, certainly used ProSci in my previous work consulting at the Hartford. I've also been exposed to William Bridges' Managing Transitions and John Cotter's 8-step model. Helped to develop some homegrown ones at some different places. But when I was recruited to come here at Travelers, they had already made the decision to use the AIM Accelerating Implementation Methodology, which is offered by IMA, Implementation Management Associates. Frankly, I wasn't familiar with AIM other than having heard about it, but I found it to be a very good fit for the culture and the work orientation for our organization, and I think it's really helped us make the progress we've made here.
Great. How about you, Eris?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. Thanks for asking that. At FAA, when we started looking for a methodology to use, we looked at all of them, and there's many, many good ones out there. We settled on the methodology of ProSci right now, and I say right now is because as we develop our maturity and gain experience, we needed a solid methodology that fit the way government works. In other words, we want to change behaviors, and ProSci's methodology really is research-based. We were looking for something less commercial because in government, we deal a lot with contractors, and one of the behaviors that was very significant that we wanted to change was the reliance on the contractor holding all the knowledge, and then when the project is done, they take all the knowledge with them. So the ProSci methodology right now really helps us focus on changing our behaviors through their research-based studies. So that's the one we're focusing on right now for probably the next 5 years. Thank you, Teresa.
Terry, it's Melanie. Can I add in a few other vendors that we are using at Akamai as well?
Absolutely.
So we have created our own proprietary or our own custom methodology and framework. I took my 7 most favorite models, threw them in a blender, and came out with an Akamai specific model that we call Leading Change. And the big difference about this model versus others are we've put it in business speak and business language, so it's more of a how-to. Our online toolkit is predominantly the work of change activation. That's Gavin Waddell's company in Australia. The videos that have been produced by Change Activation are so well received. We've built our training program around them, and it's been a great addition to our toolkit. We were able to get the toolkit up and running so fast by using them. And then we also have a blend of work that happens on the organizational front between organizational development and change management. So we have a partner, AlignOrg, that we work with on the OD side. And so, projects that are more OD in nature go in that direction. And then lastly, because I said that our demand exceeds supply, very often we have to bring in change management consultants from the outside, and we typically work with Slalom Consulting, who is, in addition to Change Management Review and TJX, one of the sponsors for ACMP New England. So that's my cadre of go-to providers at Akamai.
Thanks, Melanie. We have a question for Bill here, and Bill, the question is, can you discuss some tactics used to increase sponsor engagement when you see it as less than what is expected?
That's a great one, and besides what I share now, I'm all ears for other suggestions from other people, because this is a real, it's an ongoing challenge to work with. But so what I found is a few different avenues. One is the direct cold call approach, which is least favorite and least used because it's least effective. What I do find is if it's a situation where there's a turnover of personnel and the former sponsor who I had worked with is leaving the company or going to another part of it, I will ask them if they'll help facilitate kind of a transfer to the new person. And that doesn't always work, but when it does, it can really help get things going. The other is to look for, people that know the sponsor I would like to build stronger relationship with. And again, either through a warm-up introduction or maybe even attending a first meeting together. It's a chance to get in there and get the time of day, so to speak, from that particular person. But I think the key is once I get that chance to, have that 20 minutes, initial 20 minutes with that person, the key is to be able to show them that your focus is really on helping them improve their business. And as Melanie mentioned, putting things in plain business language, industry-related language can really make a difference, because a lot of times I don't even use the words change management, because you can sort of see an executive's eyes start to glaze over at the very mention of it. So we have a big focus on talking about implementation, business implementation to succeed in achieving objectives.
Great, thanks, Bill. And this one's to all three of you. The question is, where does your core change management group report to within the organization? Is it HR or somewhere else? Melanie, do you want to start?
I love that question. My change team reports into the HR organization.
Great. Aris, how about you?
I'm smiling. My change management group reports directly to the senior director, which is the highest position in our organization.
That's great. Okay, great. And Bill, how about yourself?
I just transferred my function in September from Human Resources, which was a really good place to get it started, to our Strategic Planning and Execution organization.
That's great. And Bill, this looks like a follow-up question to the one previous to this one, which is, do you also get top executive buy-in to influence the sponsors?
Yeah, it's funny. You know, my mission has been to grow this capability in our business insurance division, which is about 9,000 people. But overall, Travelers as an enterprise is 30,000, largely through word of mouth and maybe good luck and some other things. This has really taken off in other parts of the enterprise that I don't have responsibility for. So I'm sometimes in the situation, information technology, enterprise IT is a classic example. So sometimes I have the ability to reach out and get the CIO to put in a good word for me back in my own organization in business insurance. So I think the key is looking for those champions or possible champions in the executive ranks that can help you get that quality, you know, introductory meeting with that person you would like to be a sponsor.
Great. Thank you very much, Bill. And Melanie, there's a few questions for you here. One of them is, would you be willing to share more about your triage model?
Sure. So it's very simple. If you've seen any type of magnitude and readiness assessment, and there are plenty of them out there online, you know, mine basically asks about 20 questions to understand the size and the risk of the project at a very, very high level. So I do this well before we would do a full-blown official change readiness assessment, which we would do later on once we're actually engaged on the project. So I'm assessing magnitude and I'm assessing readiness, and then I use a spreadsheet that asks a couple questions about, you know, how many people are impacted, how many sponsors need to align on this, does everybody understand the utility of the future state? Does everybody understand that we have a problem right now? What's the organization's history with change? Does everyone have to change the same or differently? And it goes on like that. But it's fairly quick, and we do this in a 30-minute or an hour-long discussion. And the spreadsheet spits out a number, so you can plot on a 2x2, you know, what is the magnitude and readiness of this change. And so if you've got, you know, numbers that are generally higher or up and to the right, if you're using a grid, then you know that the nature of that change is likely going to need a practitioner. If you had relatively low numbers because you disclosed that you discovered that a lot of this was low risk, then that would trend toward more of the do-it-yourself or HR business partner. And quite frankly, people can figure it out on their own. You know, if folks know that their project is small and contained, they don't bring it to me. They know that it's going to be something that they're going to have to do, and they already have access to the tools in order to be able to do it. So it's more of the medium to high-level ones that folks know to bring me in and make sure that I'm out there helping do an assessment. One question that I get, since it really is a fairly straightforward spreadsheet, is, well, can you just give us the spreadsheet and we'll give you the numbers? And I say, absolutely not. Because this isn't about getting to a number. This is about me having a conversation with you and me observing how long it takes, you know, the project team or the group to get to an answer. And also it's a way for me to discover, you know, what is truly the nature of the project, what is going to be the challenge as we go forward. And so it's really about a dialogue, and every change tool that you use, you know, throughout your change work. I say this in the training that I give as well. every tool that we have is a ticket to a conversation, and it's not about the tool itself. And this very first tool that we use to triage is exactly the same.
Great. Thanks, Melanie. Just to follow on for you, there's a question here about your community of practice, and the question is, how did you identify the 130 individuals who make up your community of practice?
Okay. I hope Terry's smiling, because Terry was my special guest at my last community of practice, and it was awesome. The way that you get to be a part of the community of practice is that first you have to go through the training. And the reason you have to go through the training is because I don't let anyone have access to the tools unless they've gone through the training. So it's a step process. So the community of practice is really a reinforcement mechanism for folks who have gone through the training. The training started in the fall, a year ago actually, where we brought through all of the HR business partners, and that was in pilot mode because it was brand new. We were testing the training program, this brand new toolkit. We wanted to make sure that it was suitable for Akamai's culture and the needs of what we were doing. And it was very well received. So then we started to identify, using the advisory board, who are people who are either in HR roles or in program management roles, who are working on high-risk projects, who might be sponsors or one degree below the sponsor, who need this training more than ever. And so our first couple rounds of training were to very targeted lists of people, inviting them to take the class. And then we finally have now moved to open enrollment, and every time there's a training that's available, I actually push out a notification to the alumni who happen to be the members of the community of practice and say, just so you know, there's another training set of dates that have been posted. If you have anybody that you work with who you think would be a good fit for this training, please forward this message and let them know. That training sells out very, very quickly. So it's become a very high demand set of training. So it's worked well, and you start small and then at some point rely on your network to make it go viral. So that's how the training and the formation of the practice works. In terms of how we interact with one another, we have an online site where we are posting examples of our work. The toolkit's obviously there. We have quarterly meetings where we get together, and we usually have guest speakers like Terry, or we have panelists who are doing this work in the organization, because this is all about the stories that makes this work. And so when people hear stories about how this has worked or what their experience is like, it becomes less threatening for them to go and try something new. And it also makes sure that they're not taking that training and just throwing it on the shelf and never using it again. So that's what the community is all about.
Great. We got a question on communities of practice that I would like to share here, and this is for all three of our guests. And it reads, I noticed that communities of practice are common. I lead one with 800 members of all functions and ranks, etc. More recently, our focus has been on leaders as the #1 driver of behavioral change. I am in the early stage of building a leading change community of practice for these leaders. In 3 days, I have 50 people signed up. It is pitched at leaders, not at change agents. Do any of the presenters have experience of setting up a separate leadership community of practice, and what advice would they give? Bill, do you want to start with this one?
Sure. I don't currently have that kind of focus yet here at Travelers Business Insurance, but I have been involved in it in other companies in the past. And I think it can be a very valuable approach. The key thing that I found was important for it to work was a good understanding and relationship, and maybe even division of labor between that and whatever else is going on regarding leadership development. Sometimes change management work for leaders and the existing leadership development organizations, it can sometimes be a little bit of a territory issue. So I found at Cigna, for example, we did put together a very nice change leadership program and resulting COP, but it was necessary to spend some time up front and clear potential blockages and make sure there was alignment and agreement with the existing leadership development organization.
Great. Thanks, Bill. Eris, do you have any comments on this question?
Yeah, it's a great question. We went through the same thing like most of you did, is how do you get sponsors to get involved and keep it going? And the story that we tell is that when the director said, I want this enterprise-wide, and he was an expectation, was that all leadership should be leading change. So we took that initiative and started with the top 3 executives and 26 senior executive leaders, and put them through a one-day sponsorship training course that we provide. And we do that for all executives. In addition to that, what we realize is really to affect the change in behavior, so that, like you said earlier, is so the book just doesn't end up on the shelf and it's just seen as training, is we're fortunate enough that we have change management advisors, and each one of the senior leadership has one dedicated to them as their personal change management advisor. We call it their tutoring sessions. They work with their personal development and helping them work through their gaps on where they are currently with their change management competency level and where do they want to be in the future. That's the big thing, is not just putting a bunch of people in a room and training them. We're fortunate enough, and the leadership has heard this story and likes this, giving them the personal attention that they need to help them coach them through their gaps. So that's what we're doing on that. I just want to add one more thing, is the community of practice that we're building with our change management practitioners is vitally important to telling the whole story. They're the frontline people that we have that are working those projects. So I like to call the first ones that we've had, it's growing exponentially, the amount of CMPs that we have working on projects. I call them my alumni. They are the alumni in the FAA that is making change management happen. So keeping them together as a community practice where they give us feedback to the change management group and the advisors and to leadership on what they're experiencing, what they need, what's working well, is a tremendous value to turn this from just a program into building a competency of change for our organization. Thank you.
Thanks, Eris. There's a quick follow-up question to what you just mentioned, and that is, what are the key changes in behavior that are being targeted?
Well, that's a really good one. One is to go to moving the government, the FAA, from a culture that's been entrenched for the last 50 years of what we call a unilateral decision-making, command and control leadership, to more thinking in a mutual learning environment. The key behaviors that we want to get our leaders to do to become transformational leaders is to be more leader-leader, less directive, have the competency of using the coach approach in delivering stories, pushing authority where it needs to be, and let the people do the work. And from the change management side, it's building it as a competency, seeing that change management is not that soft, fuzzy side, the people thing that leaders usually tend to shy away and say that's just project management, but really building it as a competency. How we're measuring that, we haven't started that really in depth yet. I've got to be honest, it's not an easy thing. But what we're focusing on is the mindset change. When they start, the vocabulary and the lexicon changes, and their skill sets change, and the tool sets change. I think the common answer to that for everyone is when you start hearing it in their daily vocabulary, instead of that, tell me about that change management thing, and they're actually engaging you in conversation. And when they talk to us and say, I don't think my maturity level is being a sponsor is there yet, can you help me? That's how we're going to measure the difference in behavior.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eris. Melanie, can we flip back to the question about the communities of practice, and the question was, do any of the presenters have experience of setting up a separate leadership community of practice, and what advice would they give? Do you have any thoughts on that one?
So yeah, at Akamai we do it slightly different on the leadership front, right? Because again, the folks that I'm working with on the leading change front are predominantly practitioners, folks who are embedded in the projects, or maybe someone, maybe a senior director would be the highest level person I would put through the training program. We have a separate thing called Akamai Leadership Academy, where we're bringing our leaders through and exposing them to all kinds of leadership skills. It's a year-long training program where folks are placed into cadres of 30 people apiece, and then they have a pretty substantial kickoff at the beginning, and then I believe they get together every month throughout the year, and they're exposed to different topics and learning different skills. Change being one of them. Change is one of the capstone topics that is brought in as they're finishing up their year. So I'm partnered with Learning and Development as we fuse together what that's going to look like. What they have plans for is to actually work with an outside provider to do a change simulation so that they're actually doing real-time scenario-based work, and they're allowed to choose which change tactics as a leader they're going to deploy given the situation. So we're embarking on this. We're still in the planning stages of that, so we haven't had any of them go forth yet from the change perspective, although the cadres are well underway. But because the change piece is more of a capstone, we haven't yet crossed into actually conducting those. And so it's not a true community, as you say, where you've got hundreds of people. I think the idea in the design is that you keep a very small group of people together throughout the year, and then they learn from each other and build their network that way.
Great. Thanks, Melanie. So we have time for I think one more big picture question, so I want to make sure we get it in because it's about metrics. And the question reads, what meaningful metrics do you monitor and present to prove the value of change management in your organization? So Bill, would you like to take this one?
Sure. And I'll start by saying I think like the field of learning and development, finding the perfect metrics to do this is a holy grail. But I think it's a process of evolution and ever trying to find what makes sense. So the way I'm working it here is really in three categories. One is, the simplest, which is, reach or penetration. How many people have been exposed to the intensive workshop? How many have gone on to utilize it on multiple projects? Things of that sort. We have a series of online learning modules that supplement the workshop experience, and how many people have accessed and completed those, hits to our website, things like that. The second category is application. How do people not only utilize the skills themselves once on the initiative they brought to the workshop, but how do we start to track people using it continually on other projects and helping other people to understand how it could benefit them. And then the third category is the impact on the business. And so this is the one that I think is the most challenging, because over time I've seen it where not here at Travelers, but in previous work experiences, maybe we went a little too heavy trying to justify our existence with a lot of quantitative information that maybe wasn't all that relevant to our business customers, where I've heard in some organizations, it's like as long as the C-suite thinks it's okay, that's all we need. So what I'm striving to do is, as I mentioned earlier, our big focus is on successful business implementation and post-implementation. So until recently, we weren't really in a position where we had all the resources around implementation aligned and prepared to really track how we do on that on a large scale. And so what I'm looking to do is utilize, the different benefits we bring to the table on an implementation and say, how does this impact some of the key implementation numbers? So it could be quantitative if it's a technology play, where you can be looking at things like system utilization, percentage of time users are up on the system, calls to the help desk, tickets, things like that. But sometimes it's more qualitative, where you're getting, key stakeholder input at different times. You're tracking after action reviews after projects and seeing what's going on there. So that's the area that I hope to make more progress here at Travelers in 2017, in part because the business is now ready to do this overall, and change management can ride alongside rather than trying to do this off in a closet somewhere.
Great. Thanks, Bill. Unfortunately, we're out of time right now, so what we're going to do is actually close the call. But for that question, I'll ask Melanie and Eris if they might consider typing up an answer, and we will get it out to everybody after the webinar sometime in the next few days. So thank you very much for attending. It was lovely to have you. We hope this really answered your questions, and we look forward to meeting with you for the next one. Take care.